All right. Good evening, Daniel Nation. Welcome to our monthly podcast. Hope you guys are all tuning in tonight. We can't wait to see you. We have a great discussion lined up for you guys tonight on the topic of school choice in Texas. And we are going to have a great time discussing this issue tonight. This is one of the number one issues that we had in our legislature last year in the 88th session. And tonight we really have, I think, the nation's foremost expert in this arena, my good friend Cynthia Dunbar, who is not just an awesome legal mind and educational mind in our country, but she's also a good personal friend of mine and family friend. And actually, I'll just give you a little spoiler here. She was the attorney who helped form Daniel Nation Public Benefit Corporation. So I'm giving you a plug there for your legal firm, Cynthia. So if you need a crackerjack attorney, you want to talk to Cynthia Dunbar. But let me give you a little bit of her bio here. And then let me give you a couple of housekeeping instructions for tonight. So we are live streaming this tonight on our YouTube page and our Facebook page. You can leave comments if you would like to on the live feed, and we will see those pop up during the program. So if you have any questions that you want to ask Cynthia tonight, just put those in the comment section and I'll be able to ask her those questions. We will have a replay available as well on Rumble and YouTube at our channel, Daniel Nation PBC. So make sure and tune into that. So with no further ado, let me introduce my good friend Cynthia Dunbar. She is a former Texas State Board of Education member. She was also a former Republican National Committee woman for the state of Virginia, and she currently serves as an adjunct government professor at Regent University. She has also taught at Liberty University as well, and she is my attorney, works for Breckenridge, Thomas Noland Dunbar, PC, and she has also authored several books, including this book tonight, One Nation Under God, which if you have not read this book, you need to read this. It is talking about how the left is trying to erase what made us great. She wrote this in 2008, and I think the left has been doing a great job of erasing American history. So welcome, Cynthia, and just tell us a little bit about, what got you into education. I know you're a homeschool family, you homeschooled your kids, but why is education your passion? How did you get into this whole thing?
So actually, Brandon, you know how God has a way to pull us into things that we don't even realize. I went to law school at Regent University, and I actually studied. I was the graduate assistant for the then dean, who was Herbert Titus. I don't know if anybody knows who that is, but he had studied directly under Francis Schaeffer in L'Abri, so Switzerland. So I started doing a lot of public speaking at a lot of political events. And I was at the time homeschooling my little children, and I got a call out of nowhere saying, we have people who would really like for you to consider running for the Texas State Board of Education. And I think it was just a few years before that the Wall Street Journal had come out and said that that board was the most powerful board in the nation. Because as you know, at the time, this was pre-Common Core. And so pretty much as goes Texas was the saying, so goes the nation. And it wasn't that Texas wanted to be controlling. It's just because of the beautiful little thing called the Permanent School Fund that the Texas founders put in place. So while California needed the most textbooks, Texas needed the second most. And so Texas became the 800-pound gorilla because California was insolvent and Texas could write a check for whatever books we needed. So it kind of made the Texas State Board of Education just really, really powerful. And I prayed about it, realized that where my kids were going to be fine with their education, there were a lot of students that were not. And that really, I feel like from a standpoint of looking at education as a linchpin issue, if we as Christians don't understand the importance of education, if we allow our tax dollars to indoctrinate our children, then we lose basically our next generations. And we're seeing that. So I ran in 2006 and was elected, and my term of service was in those years where everything was shifting, where Texas was still really powerful, but it was shifting towards Common Core. As a matter of fact, my last act on the Texas State Board was to pass a resolution declaring the Department of Education unconstitutional. So.
Wow. And on that note, let's start right into it right there, because on that note, there is a movement in this country right now for educational independence. If you go out to this website, educationalindependence.net, there actually is a declaration that they have put out there that basically says that education is the jurisdiction of family government, not civil government. So tell me, paint us a picture. What's going on with our education system in America right now? And what are the different alternatives that people are talking about? Which ones are catching fire? Which ones are not catching fire? And just paint us a picture real quick. What's going on with education in the United States?
Well, Brandon, as you know, I mean, I've been in this battle, since at least 2006. And that was when my eyes were really open to how bad it was, because there really is a war for the heart and souls of our children. I mean, it's what I say, education is about our nation's most valuable asset, which is the heart and soul of our nation's children. And I can say we clearly were not driving the proverbial school bus. And unfortunately, we're still not. Now, from the time I actually started working in the trenches and on the front lines of education, trying to get parents and everyone aware of what was going on, we've made a lot of progress. And just by the fact that there's this whole movement now. But basically what has happened is through education and through the content and the curriculum and how they put it forward, and it's not just the standards, and not every state even has mandatory, application of standards as to how the textbooks in that are selected. But even with that, I mean, there's definitely a lot of control there, but you've got the textbooks and the textbook companies and all of that. And I don't have to tell you all the big names of Pearson, Houghton Mifflin, McGraw-Hill. And one of the first battles that I fought when I got on the Texas State Board was they had convinced the entire board, which the complexion is 15 elected members. So every decision was being made by majority, which is 8 votes. So 8 votes deciding content basically nationally at the time. And they had convinced us that we did not have statutory authority to deal with not adopting content as long as it met the basic physical specifications, 50% of the TEKS or Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and was free from error. But the reality was we did. All the authority was vested in the board because we could reject something for absolutely no reason at all. We had that discretion. But the counsel for the Texas Education Agency was advising differently, and the state board didn't have its own counsel. We had to send everything up through the Attorney General, wait for opinions. So when I realized that we did have that authority, I actually saw how important it was to flex our muscles with that, because it sent a message to these big textbook companies that they would meet the standards, Brandon, but then they would add a bunch of other stuff in there beyond that was horrific. And we were basically being told we couldn't do anything about it. I mean, for example, we were dealing with, the social studies standards and the biology standards, but there were textbooks talking about the impact of the history of religion. And it had chapters and chapters in this one book on all of these different religions. And it had exactly one paragraph about Christianity. And you want to know what the great impact and influence Christianity had in history, that according to this textbook that was teaching all these children, it was bells. That was our one added benefit that we provided. So these textbooks were horrible. They were horrible. We had an algebra textbook that we started naming it the Rainforest Algebra textbook, because it was the first 100 pages didn't have one math problem in it. It was all about multiculturalism and even had a chili recipe in that, but no math calculations or computations. So fast forward from that to where now we're dealing with social emotional learning, SOGI, where, and I'm sure everybody listening knows all of these mnemonics, but sexual orientation and gender identity, we've got CRT. And so when we're dealing with these things where they are pushing and promoting particular ideologies, and then even with the actual implementation of well, I call it Obama Core, but Common Core, where they were shifting the algorithms and stuff in math, where you would actually see the change from regular long division, where parents couldn't even work with their children to do their homework, to this kind of random process that was way longer. There's no reason to utilize it. And the sole reason behind it is because it kept moving away the influence of parents in the children's lives to where the teachers in the school became the predominant influence. And so all of this was happening before our eyes. I was seeing it. It was very insidious. And so I personally believe and have believed that the whole structure of our constitutional republic is tied from the Constitution to the Declaration, and from the Declaration to the standard of law that it espouses, the laws of nature, and nature's God. And so when you're actually looking at that common law, that uncodified law, and those principles, then in fact you do understand that, religion, as James Madison defined it, is our duties owed to God. Well, what is a parent's duty owed to God is to train up a child in the way they should go. They can delegate it, but they cannot assign it, meaning they're going to be responsible for that no matter what. And so handing that over into the civil government jurisdiction, which is the tear of the sword for those who do evil, it creates homogenization of belief. It creates socialized education. It creates all sorts of problems. So school choice is a huge issue that we have to move forward to allow the parents to, at minimum, be able to select how they want their children to be educated.
Absolutely. So thanks for painting us a great picture of the landscape of what's going on in education. That's a great, you gave us a lot of great points there. So let's talk about school choice now. So here in Texas, we got Governor Abbott, who's pushing for a school voucher program. You have a very different approach to how to offer school choice in Texas. I think one of the biggest fears among homeschool parents, because we're a homeschool family, or even parents who have their kids in private schools, is that, what the government giveth, the government taketh away. And if we somehow allow tax dollars to go towards homeschooling our kids or giving them private education, somehow the government's going to get their strings attached and tell us what we have to teach our kids. And there's a lot of people that are, kind of weary of that. And I understand why. With the amount of big government we're dealing with in our country today, people are very much leery of our government. So tell us exactly, what is Governor Abbott's voucher plan? And then how does that compare to what you're proposing to do, and kind of paint us a picture of that?
So actually, and even when you were talking about parents and people being leery of government control, I mean, that's actually the battle that Horace Mann, when they were first trying to put forward the whole socialized education under which we're now operating, was the parents didn't want to give over control to the government. And so they actually promoted it by saying, well, you can't have, we know religion and morality, using George Washington's farewell address, is essential to the pillars of our freedom. And so how can we have that if they don't know how to read and they can't read the Bible? And so, being leery of governmental control is actually something we should maintain, because that's the whole definition of freedom. I mean, I think Jefferson said that when the people fear the government, that's tyranny. And when the government fears the people, that is liberty. So I completely understand that. I think that's why my legislation that I'm advocating is so important. Some people may say, well, there's not a significant distinction, but there really is. And I'm going to try to break it down. I call this legislation the Education Emancipation Act. It's a way to free education from the gridlock control, monopolistic control of the independent school districts. And so we understand in every industry that competition is necessary for excellence. And we do this in every area except for educating our children, where we allow this monopolistic control through the independent school districts. And so we do need school choice. But I think vouchers, there is the concern of regulatory control that can go with that. And so the way that I have framed it is that we give instead an education exemption. And that's important because when you have a tax exemption, that is not a tax credit. That is not something the government is giving you. It's an area where you are exempt from being taxed. So if the easiest way to describe this, and this is the way that it's written, is similar to like your homestead exemption. When you apply for a homestead exemption because your house is actually your homestead, then that means that for that portion, the government can't tax you. So that money stays in your pocket. It always stays your money. It never becomes the government's money. And that's key, because if it never becomes the government's money, then the government never gains control to have strings for regulation. So basically, most people, I think maybe most people know that the majority of funding for education comes through the local government, through your ISD, and through your property taxes. So when you are looking to try to free up dollars, drafting this as I did as an tax exemption, it's basically allows any person to apply for an education exemption as they would a homestead exemption. And so if you are, and I'll just give you some simple math, not that this is absolutely, this is just for understanding. So here's an example. If you had 2 kids and you were homeschooling both of those kids, that's a savings to that ISD, because you are educating those children, because they know that each child is, let's say, for every child who's sitting in a seat at school, costs them $11,000. So that's a savings to the district of $22,000. But right now you recognize none of that. So when you are doing your homestead your education exemption, as long as you're providing an educational alternative under the education code, then you should be exempt from that portion of the tax, of your property tax, that would go to the ISD. Now, there's a couple of things with that. We also added, because that's obviously only going to impact the education of those who actually own homes, which that's probably everyone listening falls within that category. But then there's a lot of others who don't own homes. And so that's why it also developed in the legislation, it has a place for a corporate exemption if that corporation is providing scholarships to Title I students within their jurisdiction where they're paying taxes. And so now what it does is it also allows there to be a way for those students who would normally not be able to avail themselves of school choice to also have choices through these scholarships. And the beauty of this is, Brandon, is that you're doing 2 things. Not only are you freeing up new monies for the parents to be able to use towards choice, you're also taking those monies from the pot that uses that money to maintain monopolistic control currently. And you are fueling more competition, which is going to bring excellence to the whole educational universe as a whole. So, I don't want to go into too much detail on the legislation, but I do feel like, and I will, to the extent that you want to clear things up, but this exemption is not being used anywhere. And it actually, I think, is something that every homeschooler can get on board with, because it does free up new monies, but it absolutely does not come with any governmental strings attached.
So, and I think it's a brilliant plan. I haven't really heard of this alternative until you told me about it, and no one's really out there pushing this. And so I really appreciate this fresh perspective on how to do this. So how do we overcome the pushback from the ISDs who are going to scream about the fact that, well, I know that, we're saving $11,000 because we don't have to educate your child but we want your $11,000 to educate somebody else's kid who lives in the district. School districts are very, very, I hate to use the word greedy, but we live in Frisco. I live in Frisco, or my church is in Frisco. And, the school district here, I mean, they build Taj Mahals. I mean, they build, travertine tile floors and Starbucks inside their high schools. I mean, it's crazy the millions of dollars they spend on these buildings here. But we start taking money away from the district, they are going to scream to the government, how are we going to keep our schools open? So how do we respond to that, Cynthia?
Well, I think this is the automatic response. If you're doing such a good job, nobody's going to want to leave. And if nobody's leaving, there's not going to be any impact to your checkbook. The only problem is if you're not doing a good enough job to where there are parents who come out. And so we want that to be used for competition, because that competition, like I said, I mean, we have antitrust laws that prevent monopolies in any other industries except our greatest asset, our children's minds. And so when we allow those monies to come out where they have to compete for them, then that's actually going to motivate a higher and better product. And we know there's monies that are not being utilized wisely. I mean, if you look at what is being paid, I think Sci-Fair's superintendent is paid like $523,000 or something like that dollars a year. They have print shops on campus. They sometimes give 2 or 3 sets of books. So they have one in their locker, one in their classroom, and one they can take home. I mean, when you see how the monies are not spent wisely, then there's a lot that can be done to make these school districts more economical. And at the bottom line is, this is taxpayer dollars. So if they can't operate, I used to say that when I ran for the Texas State Board, I said, look, it's not a money issue. It's not. Because if you bring me, I will make a bet. I will pay $1,000 to anyone who can bring me an illiterate 8th grader from a private school. Because we do have illiterate 8th graders in public school. We actually have remedial math and English on college campuses now to try to make up for the lack of these kids graduating from public schools where they're not meeting the standards. And so I felt very safe saying that, Brandon, because there's no way you're going to have an illiterate 8th grader in a private school where people are paying tuition. They will absolutely go bankrupt. So this is not as much, and when I was on the school board, you'd hear it over and over and over. The Texas State Board, people would say, well, we need more money for our kiddos. No, we need more accountability for our kiddos. We need to make sure they're being educated, not indoctrinated. When I told you about that rainforest education, that math textbook that had, 100 pages before you had even one calculation, our math standards were so subpar to India, and we were looking at what they were using for textbooks in India. It was stapled together papers of computation after computation after computation. So I'm sorry. This is not about the money and the dollars. It is about subpar services being provided to our children. And I think the taxpayers as a whole are getting fed up with it enough. I mean, COVID did a great thing that those of us like me who've been talking about education forever, I mean, it opened the doors of reality to let people know there are other ways to do this, and they don't have to be sitting in those classrooms at the ISD. And so now I think that awareness is forcing them. They are going to have to do something. This is not like it was in the 1970s. So they can gripe and complain, but they have to see the writing on the wall that there is change coming. And I think this is a way, because think about it, they're not going to get this huge amount of cash influx into each person's hands. I mean, what we're talking about is an exemption. So at the end of the day, the most you can get is that portion of your property taxes from the amount of property taxes you're already paying to your ISD. So let's say that that ends up, being, I don't know, $900 or whatever. That can actually pay, though, for your homeschool textbooks. I mean, this is like something where you're not going to be getting rich from this, but it's starting to open the door a crack, or to get the camel's nose under the tent, so to speak, where we can start deconstructing the Colosseum, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think your plan is brilliant, and I've said to my wife for years, I said, "Why am I paying property taxes to fund a school district where my kids have never attended or ever benefited from?" I have 4 kids. You know how expensive that is for me to educate 4 of my kids, and
Yeah.
and then in Frisco, I mean, the property taxes and the rates have been so historically high. I think my school bill one year was like $9,000 to the school district. It was crazy, and my kids got no benefit from that. So let's just talk about pragmatically now. Let's say that your plan catches fire, which I'm praying it does catch fire across Texas. And let's say that, we take this to task in the 89th legislature. First of all, how much support would you need in the 89th legislature to get it passed? Did you propose this plan in the 88th legislature or a form of this plan, and where did it go? And how do we work to get Greg Abbott on board with the plan?
So a lot of questions, and great questions. First of all, it was initially brought forward, I believe, in 2016. Rick Miller sponsored it. It didn't get a lot of traction. I think I was ahead of the curve and caring about something that the normal populace at that time was not so aware of. There was, because Ledge Research was looking at the fiscal note, which, because it'd be changing ad valorem taxation, they were saying this has to be a constitutional change. And so that would look like, 2/3 passage in the legislature and then taking it as a vote to the people. I do think there's an argument that perhaps there isn't that type of fiscal implementation, because arguably if it's an exemption, those monies aren't even the government's, but because it is a shift from that current place, like you said, where they're currently getting it, then it is most likely going to have to go forward as a constitutional amendment. And so with that, no, it did not go through the 88th legislature. As you know, I more recently came back to Texas from Virginia, and I had not been staying very involved in Texas politics as I used to be. And I actually got pulled into this because of everything that was happening with the special session and the vouchers and all of that. I went to a town hall meeting and talked to someone there, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, this needs to be brought forward. No one knows about this option because we're only thinking about the vouchers." I actually did have a meeting with the chairman of the Senate Education Committee. And because at that point, the governor was really gridlock, driven with the special session, trying to get through what he had already been putting forward, it was not really the opportune time to bring forward like Plan B. And I think the special session had already been called, where it was specifically only pertaining to that whole voucher system. So, and as you know, that was killed. And Representative Phelan was, really going after that to make sure that that didn't go forward. And so I think right now there's the opportunity to really step back and go, we need to have some options. I do know that the Education Committee is aware of it. I have reached out to several other senators as well to try to build not just sponsorship, but co-sponsorship. I would like to see bipartisan sponsorship, because the reality is this. This is one way that actually does provide resources for what the left tends to argue all the time, is whenever you do school choice, you leave the poorest of the poor out because they don't have the options to be able to take part in it. And obviously you do with scholarships and that, but by allowing there to be these corporate scholarships for these students to be able to have school choice, when I was actually on the board, we had a lot of parents come forward from some of these poor schools complaining, saying, "We want English immersion because you're harming our students because they cannot speak English well, so they can't do well on the standardized test." You would never hear this. The left would argue the opposite. we would have parents come forward and saying, we want to be able to have school choice, to allow our kids to go to like Christian charters and that, because they are being bullied and there's not safety at school. And again, you would never hear this because the liberal representatives on the board were all entrenched with the ISDs and the teachers' lobbies and all of that. So there really is a need for these inner city reps to see that their constituents' needs are really being met, and that they are part of the whole group that gets to take advantage of these educational options. And so I would love to see bipartisan sponsorship if possible, because it's a pretty high bar to get it out. And then once it's out, to actually have the people be able to vote on it. But I am very, very hopeful that in light of where education is today and where the concerns of parents lie, that there's a very high probability that if it is put on the ballot, that it would pass.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say that we make it through the whole gamut. We make your bill through the 89th legislature. We pass it into law, or at least it becomes a constitutional vote that voters get to vote on. And let's say the voters approve of it and they want this, and it heads into the implementation phase. How would this be rolled out? Is this something that you would just do on your tax return to the IRS in the following tax year, or are there interim steps? How would you roll it out?
It'd be really easy, because it's all going to be done through your local government. So your local governments are going to actually have to send out information like they do with homestead exemptions, only they're going to have to include on it this time an education exemption. You just check when you're doing, your form, that you are claiming an education exemption, and then it would be calculated, that percentage from your ISD would be offset from your property taxes. Okay. So it would, again, it's not money the government's giving you, it's money that stays in your pocket. And that's what's beautiful about it, is you're not going to have to put some entity in place for the state to pay for them to be, the local government is already there doing the calculations as far as your local taxes and all of that. So it would just be as simple as being able to check that you're taking a homestead exemption on your taxes. Now, it would be a little more complex as far as what the corporate exemption is for providing those scholarships. But again, that's going to be calculated through your local taxes.
So, if I'm a homeowner, it's very easy for me because I've filled out that form before, and it's just a box I check that I have, number of kids, and this is my exemption for my school ISD taxes. If I'm a renter, though, is the scholarship program my only option, or is there another way for me to get the benefit as a renter?
Yeah, unfortunately, right now, getting this bill through in the initial form, it's going to be either homeowners or the scholarships. There's not really a way, because right now renters, they're not paying any of that portion to the ISDs currently. So there's nothing for them to offset. I'm not saying that this is a holistic response, because I feel like there needs to be a larger response, but I feel like it is a really good response to start out with, to start leveling that balance of where the monies are currently held predominantly within the ISDs.
Yeah, definitely. Are you having any conversations with the Republican Party of Texas? Our convention is coming up next month. We're going to be setting our legislative priorities for the 89th session. I think school choice might make it into the top 10 this year. I think it needs to make it into the top 10, because last year it was parental rights and educational freedom was in the top 10, and we did not get school choice passed. And so I can't imagine that issue going away at our convention next month. But are you having conversations with, first of all, we have a lot of moving parts in the party, because we have the chair is vacating. Matt Rinaldi's not coming back. So you've got 6 candidates running for the chair, about 4 candidates, I believe, running for the vice chair. So there's a big shuffling of the board going on. But do you have any inroads with the RPT to try to get that on our legislative priorities?
So what's interesting, the reason I was chuckling when you said that is you always come up with these great ideas, because the answer is no, I have not. But as soon as I get off with you, I am going to make my calls. Obviously, there are tons of people with the RPT, and even, having served on the RNC, I got to be very close, which actually I teased Robin Armstrong that I was his first formal endorsement, which I think I was, because we were campaigning together at the same time when I was campaigning for the state board. But yeah, I will be contacting the party. And because when I was national committee woman, I got calls a lot of times from other states. Would you pass certain resolutions? Would you do things? And I actually did one that was about parental rights because of calls that I got from Texas. And Tony Perkins later interviewed me, because he's like, Cynthia, this is the first thing that puts teeth in any kind of rights for parents. And it was basically moving the opt-out for salacious materials to an opt-in, a proactive opt-in, meaning that the standard would be that you could not prevent any salacious material to any students, that it would be under that obscenity standard and would not come under the exemption unless you had a proactive opt-in. And so I've worked with the RNC and the Republican Party of Texas and others on this type of legislation and platform. So I will be contacting them.
Okay, awesome. That's great. And this probably is a good segue for me just to say that next month's podcast, actually, we're going to be interviewing the candidates for the chair of the Republican Party of Texas and the vice chair. So that's going to be next month's podcast. And that's, our convention is the largest convention, they say, in the world. I don't know if that's true, but 6,000 delegates that's a lot of people that are converging on San Antonio. I will be going. I'll be down there, as a delegate and representing my district. But I think school choice absolutely needs to make it out of our convention as a top 10. With a little bit of time that we have left, by the way, if you have a question or comment, I'm not seeing anything pop in here, but leave a comment on YouTube there on the live feed, and it will pop into my comments screen here. If you have a question for Cynthia, we want to get those questions answered. But switching gears, tell us about your book, One Nation Under God. You wrote this in 2008 when Obama was president. It's talking about how the left is trying to erase what made America great. Of course, we had President Trump, thank God, who came along with MAGA, making America great again. But we're in a battle right now for the future of this country. And where do you see things going in our nation? I mean, what do you think we're going to see a divine turnaround with Trump in November? Or what are you seeing? What are you feeling?
So, I do the constitutional corner for Intercessors for America, and I earned the moniker of the prophetic professor, because me, I'm very much into operating prophetically with seeing what God is doing, because if we're operating out of our own strength and our own efforts, then we're laboring in vain. I will say, I wrote the book actually in 2008. It was right before Obama actually took office. And I even came out with concerns of his connections with Bill Ayers and others. And actually, that was when I got my first death threat that I had to turn over to the FBI. Yes. And an interesting note, Brandon. Okay. Get this connection. Here he is, supposed to be running as a Christian and have nothing to do with the Muslims. And but the first terror threat I got was from a Muslim terror cell in Annandale, Virginia, that they knew had ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. So, and it was because of the things that I was saying. So I have seen that this battle has been waging for a lot longer than what most people are aware of. And we are actually waking up. I think there's more people who are waking up. But the beauty of what I see God doing is he has never needed a majority. He always operates. He can operate on his own, but he works through a remnant many times. And so what I really see is not so much looking at the numbers, but really looking at that transformation in our hearts of stepping into that place of realizing that we're going to step into those greater works than these, and understanding that all authority is given to Christ. And so we as joint heirs with Christ operate within that. And what that looks like when we're taking the gospel, which is good news, to the nations. And it says that, God will lift up the capstone with shouts of grace, grace to it. So I think this whole move, even within the church, of understanding the grace is the completed works of the cross, and that we have that revelation that that's transformative, not only to our nation, but to the world. So I believe what I've been sensing is that God is about to move in unlikely areas. And by that, I've, seen moves in the younger generation, a lot of times the youth and even the young children that people kind of disregard or even malign. I've seen a move of God happening there. I have been praying specifically for people within the Democratic Party, because it's not God's will that any should perish. So it's not an us against them. Our enemy is not flesh and blood. So I believe that there's going to be some transformation there. I believe unlikely places like California and New York. So I am just really, I'm hopeful and excited and have anticipation that it's getting better, not worse. And I do, you and I have the same eschatology. And so I think that plays into it too, because we want to be occupying. We want to see the redemption of all things. We want to be moving forward and be part of being salt and light to a lost and dying world. So my prophetic claim is that it's getting better. I mean, the darkness gets more extreme. We see the dark and light more extreme, the lighter the light gets. So I think that's part of the reason that we're now seeing and exposing how dark it is. It's not that it's darker. It's always been really, really dark. It's just been hiding in the shadows. So the more light we bring, the more we expose it.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you giving us that outlook, because there's just obviously the election coming up. We have a big runoff election in Texas, May the 28th, with 8 runoffs going on across the state. And then, of course, we got our national election in November. And so we are praying every Tuesday, by the way. If you're out there and you want to help us pray for the elections, every Tuesday from 12 to 1, we have a conference call with Daniel Nation, and we were praying for David Covey and his race against Dave Phelan. And we're praying for other candidates who are running in their races in May for their runoffs, as well as we're praying for, obviously, the November election is huge, and we're praying for that as well. So please definitely tune in. If you want to get Cynthia's book or more information about Cynthia, there is her website, Cynthia Dunbar.
That's not it.
That's not the right one? Okay, taking it off. What's the website?
So the best one to go to is it's real short. Just go to resranch.com. That's our ministry website, but I'm on there as the prophetic professor. So the easiest thing is www.rezranch.com.
Okay, thanks for correcting me on that. Hold on, I want to put this on the screen for you guys. Does that look right?
Yep. That's
okay,
it.
So
and like I said, it's the prophetic professor tab, and they'll get all sorts of information on there.
All right. So don't go to that first website. Go to this website, resranch.com. Go out there and get Cynthia's information. She's such a wealth of information. Every time I talk to her on the phone about any issue at all, political, spiritual, legal, she always has just a wealth and reservoir of information and revelation to share with me. And I'm so thankful that you've come into our family's life. We've been walking together now for over a decade. It's been an honor to know you and to know, Brendan as well, and your whole family. And so we are also going to do another podcast together, and we want to talk about how churches need to take the stranglehold of the IRS 501c3 noose off of their necks, and they need to get free from that bondage of not being able to speak the truth from their pulpits. And that's what Daniel Nation has done. We have taken off the 501c3 chains of slavery off of us, because I was so targeted by the media and the wokeism after Trump's election in 2020 that I had to do something different. And so Cynthia was the brilliant legal mind that said, hey, have you ever thought about starting a B corporation? And we want to do a whole podcast just on B corporations and what pastors need to be doing. I think the persecution against the church is going to increase. against pastors is going to increase. And I think pastors need to wise up, and we need to get around this juggernaut in our government. You know, like I said before on the podcast, what the government giveth, they taketh away. So they gave us these great tax exemptions and tax write-offs, but then they said, oh, by the way, we want to scrub your sermons and don't ever talk about political candidates from your pulpit because that's a taboo subject. And we have got to start speaking louder and bolder than we ever have as pastors. And so I want to have you back on for a podcast, Cynthia, to do that. I know you would love to do that one, right?
Yeah, I would love. My heart is so there because, you know, when the Lord just said it's time for the church to be the church, and I am so excited to see that, because when the world encounters the church actually being the church, watch out.
Amen. Amen. And so just in conclusion tonight, our next podcast, as I already mentioned, is going to be next month in May. And we're going to be interviewing the candidates for the chairman position and the vice chairman position of the Texas GOP. And if you would like to get notified of when that podcast is going to go live, just email me at brandon@danielnation.com, and I will get you on my email list and send you that information for the next podcast. Cynthia, it has been an honor to have you on this podcast tonight. Thank you so much for giving of your time and of your knowledge. And I just want to speak a blessing over you in this bill. And I want to pray also that it will get before the right people in the 89th session. And I want to say this in conclusion, with Dr. Tom Oliverson putting his name in the hat to be the new Speaker of the Texas House, and with Dave Phelan's imminent defeat in less than 4 weeks away, I think we may have an actual shot of getting your bill in front of the right people and supported by the right people on the right committees in the next session. So I'm going to be one of your champions pushing for this at the convention next month. So thank you so much, Cynthia. You are a blessing. We love you, and we'll have you on again. Okay.
Thank you, Brandon. God bless.
Okay. God bless.